Imagine this. A man walks into a family gathering. He's 35 years old. His career is thriving. His bank account is healthy. His friends respect him. And he looks confident in his own skin. By every metric, he's made it. But the room doesn't see what he has. It only notices what he lacks. A wedding ring. Within minutes, someone leans in with the same predictable question. So, when are you getting married? Now, most men would stumble here. Some would laugh nervously. Others would get defensive, scrambling for excuses. I just haven't found the right person yet, or work has been too busy. But this man, he does something different. He smiles calmly and says, I don't need to. Silence, confusion, maybe even discomfort. The air shifts. Aunts exchange looks. Uncles raise their eyebrows. Some laugh awkwardly, but others look genuinely unsettled. Why? Why would such a simple statement trigger such unease? Because in that moment, this man has violated one of society's deepest unspoken rules. The rule that says a man is not complete until he marries. By declaring he doesn't need marriage, he's not insulting anyone. He's not devaluing love or partnership, but he's quietly threatening an entire worldview that most people have lived their whole lives believing. And that's why the unmarried man, self-sufficient, unapologetic and free, terrifies society. It's not because he rejects love or despises relationships. He's dangerous because he represents freedom. Freedom is contagious. When others see a man thriving, financially stable, socially respected, personally fulfilled, without the structure of marriage, it sparks questions that society desperately wants to keep buried. Do I actually want this? Or was I told to want this? Am I married because it fulfills me, or because I feared judgment if I didn't? If he's thriving without following the script, what does that say about me? These questions destabilize the foundation of cultural order. They pull at the strings of tradition, religion, economics, and family expectation. They reveal that what we've been told is necessary may in fact be optional, and nothing is scarier to a system built on conformity than the idea that people might choose freely. Get into a decent job, get married, buy a house, have kids, provide for your family, retire. The story was already written, and you were told your worth depended on following it. Stray from the path, and you'd be labeled incomplete, selfish, or broken. Marriage wasn't just about love, it was about predictability. Because a married man is a controlled man. He has bills to pay, children to raise, and a spouse to support. He can't just quit his job and disappear for 6 months. He can't suddenly pivot careers or risk everything on a crazy idea. He has to stay in line. And for centuries, this worked. It kept society stable. It kept economies humming. It kept men predictable. But now something is shifting. We're living in an age where, for the first time in history, men have the freedom to truly choose. Social pressure still exists, but the walls are cracking. Religion no longer dictates everyone's destiny. Economic survival no longer depends on marriage. The weight of tradition is lighter than it's ever been, which means men are waking up, and some are discovering a radical truth. I don't need marriage to be whole. Here's why that truth terrifies the people around him. Because if one man proves he can be happy, fulfilled, and respected without marrying, it challenges everyone who did marry without asking themselves why. It calls into question decades of sacrifice, compromise, and conformity. It whispers, maybe you didn't have to. And that's not something most people want to confront. So instead, they project their discomfort back onto him. They'll accuse him of being immature. They'll suggest he's secretly unhappy. They'll insist he'll regret it one day. But none of this is about him. It's about protecting themselves from doubt. The truth is, this man isn't a threat because of what he lacks. He's a threat because of what he represents. Autonomy, self-definition, a life lived on his own terms. Think back to your earliest memories. What were you taught, directly or indirectly, about what it means to be a man? Maybe you heard it in fairy tales, where the prince always rescues the princess and marries her at the end. Maybe you saw it in cartoons, where the male hero's journey was never complete until he found his other half. Maybe it came from relatives, asking little boys who their girlfriend was at school. These messages start early. They're subtle at first, but they accumulate like bricks. One after another, they build a wall around your sense of identity. By the time you reach adulthood, you've been thoroughly programmed with the idea that being a real man means one thing above all else: find a wife, settle down, start a family. Everything else, your career, your achievements, your passions, is secondary. Without marriage, society whispers, you're unfinished. Here's the thing, this message wasn't about your happiness, it was about your predictability, because a predictable man is a manageable man. When boys are taught to define their value through marriage, they grow up chasing external approval instead of cultivating internal strength. They measure their worth, not by who they are, but by who validates them. Think about it. A man who believes he's incomplete without marriage will spend decades trying to earn it. working longer hours to prove he's a provider, buying status symbols to look like a good catch, silencing parts of himself that might seem too selfish or too free. This isn't by accident, it's by design. Philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche called this slave morality, a system that convinces you you're broken, so you'll spend your whole life obeying the rules meant to fix you. And it works brilliantly, because if you think you're incomplete, you'll gladly trade freedom for approval. Of course, the pressure isn't just cultural, it's deeply personal. Families reinforce the script. Parents want grandchildren, relatives want to see you settled, entire communities build their rhythm around family life. Weddings aren't just personal milestones, they're collective validations. They reassure everyone that the system is still intact. So when a man steps outside of this cycle, when he says I don't need marriage, it's not just his decision, it feels like a betrayal of the entire lineage. It feels like an attack on tradition itself. That's why the reactions are so visceral. The discomfort isn't about him, it's about what he represents, a crack in the narrative that others have built their lives upon. Psychologist Carl Jung had a word for the social mask we all wear, the persona. The persona is the version of you that plays by the rules. It's the polite son who nods when asked about marriage. It's the hard-working employee who sacrifices personal dreams for corporate loyalty. It's the version of yourself society applauds, but underneath the mask lies something deeper, your authentic self. The authentic self might not want marriage. It might crave freedom, creativity, or solitude. It might value adventure over stability, self-expression over predictability. The problem, most men never learn to distinguish the persona from the authentic self. They live their entire lives performing the role expected of them, never asking, is this actually what I want? And by the time they do ask, it's often too late. They're bound by commitments, contracts, and responsibilities that leave little room for exploration. So why does this script persist, even in a modern world where choice is technically possible? Because scripts keep society stable. A man who follows the script buys a house, signs up for insurance, settles into a steady job, raises children who repeat the same cycle. In other words, he feeds the system. But a man who rejects the script, he becomes unpredictable. He might move to another country. He might quit a high-paying job to pursue a passion. He might refuse to buy into industries built around marriage and family life. And unpredictability terrifies institutions that rely on conformity. Here's the pivotal point. The unmarried man who doesn't need marriage has broken free from the programming. He no longer believes he's incomplete. He no longer needs external validation. He no longer confuses the persona with the authentic self. Instead, he has done the hard inner work, facing his shadow, embracing his independence, cultivating wholeness within himself. This doesn't mean he'll never marry. It means that if he does, it will be from a place of strength, not weakness, from wholeness, not neediness, from freedom, not obligation. And that's what makes him so threatening to a world that depends on conformity. Because the moment one man proves you don't need the script, everyone else starts to wonder if they need it either. To understand why the unmarried man unsettles society so much, we need to strip away the romantic language and look at marriage for what it has historically been, a system of order and control. Now that doesn't mean love isn't real. It doesn't mean marriage can't be beautiful or meaningful. But alongside its personal dimension, marriage has always served a social function. It has kept people predictable, and predictability is power. Let's start with the obvious. A married man is tethered. He has responsibilities that extend beyond himself. A spouse depending on him, children who require stability, bills that must be paid on time, a mortgage or rent that locks him to one place. These anchors tie him to the system. He can't easily quit his job, take risks, or walk away from obligations. He can't disappear into the unknown without consequences. And that's the point. A married man is less likely to gamble with his future because too many lives are attached to his choices. He's less likely to challenge authority, less likely to rebel, less likely to abandon the conveyor belt of daily life. Society doesn't just prefer this, it depends on it. Think about how much of the global economy relies on the assumption that most adults will marry. Housing markets depend on family buyers. Single men rarely purchase the 4-bedroom suburban home with a yard. Insurance companies design products around family packages. Health, life, auto, home, all bundled for couples and children. Retailers profit from weddings, anniversaries, family holidays, school expenses, and consumer goods marketed toward households. Employers count on employees being tethered by family obligations, making them less likely to walk away from stable jobs. The married man is the backbone of this machine. He earns, he spends, he provides, he sustains industries that thrive on predictability. But the man who doesn't need marriage, he breaks the cycle. He rents a smaller space, spends less on insurance, avoids consumer traps, and most dangerously, he can walk away from a job if it doesn't serve him. He becomes harder to control because he's freer to choose. He might move to another country. He might choose to live simply, consume less, or reject the pressure to prove himself through possessions. For the individual, this might be liberating, but for the system, it's destabilizing. Here's the clever part. Society rarely frames marriage as an obligation. Instead, it's presented as a choice, one that every successful man naturally makes. But look closer. Is it really a choice if the alternative is being labeled immature, incomplete, or selfish? This is what philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche warned about, systems that disguise obedience as freedom. He called it herd morality, the belief that what everyone else does must be the right thing. And in that herd, marriage isn't just a norm, it's an expectation. So when a man calmly says, "I don't need marriage," he's breaking free from herd morality. He's living proof that the choice is real, that you can succeed, be respected, and thrive without following the script. And that, more than anything, threatens the illusion that keeps so many people in line. Notice what happens when you tell people you don't need marriage. They don't just shrug and say, "Good for you." They get defensive. Some argue, some insist you'll regret it, some even get angry. Why such strong reactions? Because your freedom casts a shadow on their choices. If you're whole without marriage, what does that say about the sacrifices they've made? About the decades they've spent equating worth with marital status? About the compromises they've accepted as inevitable? Your independence doesn't just free you, it unsettles them. It makes them question whether they chose freely or simply followed the script. And few people want to confront that possibility, not because he threatens families or rejects love, but because he refuses to be controlled by the same levers, shame, obligation, tradition, that keep others in line. He can walk away from a job, he can redefine success, he can live on less, he can choose relationships that enhance rather than complete him. And if enough men live this way, the system built on conformity begins to wobble. So far, we've looked at how society programs men to view marriage as a requirement, and how that programming keeps them predictable. But if you break free from that programming, if you reject the idea that your worth depends on a wedding ring, what kind of man do you become? To answer this, we turn to two of the most influential thinkers of the modern era, Friedrich Nietzsche and Carl Jung. Nietzsche believed that most people live according to rules they didn't create. They inherit values from society, religion, tradition, and culture, and then follow them blindly, mistaking obedience for morality. But Nietzsche envisioned something greater, the Übermensch, or overman. The overman doesn't accept values just because they're handed down. He questions them. He asks, does this serve my life, my growth, my authentic self? If not, he discards them and creates his own. This doesn't mean rejecting everything. The overman may choose marriage, but if he does, it's because it aligns with his authentic values, not because society told him he must. That's the crucial difference. The overman lives by choice, not compulsion. And when a man calmly says, "I don't need marriage," he's channeling this spirit. He's refusing to accept completeness as defined by others. He's creating his own definition of a complete life. This is what terrifies society, because if one man can do it, others might follow. And once enough men realize the rules are optional, the entire structure begins to crumble. Carl Jung, working in the field of psychology, arrived at a similar conclusion from a different angle. Jung believed that every person's journey is to become whole, to integrate all aspects of the psyche, both light and dark. He called this process individuation. Most men, Jung argued, never complete this journey. Instead, they cling to the persona, the mask society wants them to wear. The good man, the provider, the selfless husband. But beneath that mask lies the shadow, the selfishness, independence, wildness, and untamed energy that society tells men to suppress. When a man denies his shadow, he becomes incomplete. He overcompensates with performance, working harder, spending more, proving his worth through external validation. But the man who faces his shadow, who admits, "Yes, I can be selfish. Yes, I value freedom. Yes, I don't always want to sacrifice," gains something extraordinary. By integrating these darker elements instead of hiding them, he becomes whole. And once he is whole, he no longer needs someone else to complete him. He may choose a partner, but not from lack, from strength. But when a man develops these qualities, empathy, intuition, emotional depth within himself, he becomes balanced. Now he doesn't need a woman to unlock his emotional side. He can access it on his own, which means if he chooses to love, it's not to fill a void, it's to share wholeness with another. This is powerful because it removes the leverage society uses to pressure men into marriage. You can't guilt a man into marrying if he doesn't feel incomplete without it. You can't shame him for being single if he's genuinely whole. That's why Jung's individuated man and Nietzsche's overman are so threatening. They don't need approval, validation, or external completion. They've found it within themselves. This is the heart of the threat. A man who is whole on his own isn't just free, he's contagious. Others see him thriving without following the script and start to wonder, do I need the script either? This is why family, friends, and even strangers sometimes react with hostility when a man declares he doesn't need marriage. It's not really about him, it's about the fear that his example will expose their own unexamined choices. Put Nietzsche and Jung together, and you see the full picture. Nietzsche's overman creates his own values, refusing to inherit them blindly. Jung's individuated man integrates his shadow and inner feminine, becoming psychologically whole. The result, a man who doesn't need marriage to be complete. He might still marry, but if he does, it will be a conscious choice, not a compulsory performance. And if he doesn't, he remains whole, respected, and fulfilled. Either way, he lives from freedom. And freedom, as we've said, is the one thing society cannot control. Let's pause for a moment and ask a dangerous question. What if your feelings of incompleteness are not natural at all? What if they've been carefully manufactured? From childhood, you were told you're missing something, that you're not whole until you find the one, that you need your other half, that true manhood begins only when you marry, buy a house, and start a family. This belief doesn't just shape culture, it fuels an entire economy. And here's the unsettling truth. Billions of dollars depend on keeping you convinced you're incomplete. Consider the wedding industry. Globally, it's worth more than $300 billion. Every year, billions are spent on rings, venues, dresses, suits, photographers, flowers, honeymoons. But it doesn't stop there. Real estate markets thrive on family buyers, bigger houses with extra bedrooms and yards. Insurance companies design products around family plans, health coverage, life insurance, car policies bundled for spouses and kids. Retailers profit from anniversaries, Valentine's Day, family holidays, back-to-school shopping. Luxury industries thrive on men proving their provider status. Expensive cars, bigger apartments, high-end dining. Now ask yourself, how much of this consumption is driven by genuine desire and how much is performance? You buy the fancy car because you think it signals your husband material. You upgrade to a larger apartment because a real man needs the space for a family. You spend on restaurants, vacations, and gifts, not because you truly want them, but because you believe they show you're ready to provide. This is performance masculinity. It's not about what you want, it's about what others expect. And the man who doesn't need marriage, he sees right through it. He realizes most of his past spending wasn't driven by authentic desire, it was driven by a script, by the need to prove he was a worthy candidate for a role he no longer wants to audition for. Nietzsche spoke about the will to power, but not the way it's often misunderstood. It's not about domination over others, it's about mastery over yourself. When you redirect the energy you once spent on proving yourself outwardly and instead invest it inwardly, developing your mind, your health, your craft, you reclaim power. You stop buying out of insecurity, you stop living for appearances, you start living from authenticity. This shift is revolutionary because it removes the hooks that industries use to control you. If you're not chasing external validation, you can't be manipulated into spending to earn it. And that terrifies an economy built on your neediness. Carl Jung's concept of individuation also applies here. The individuated man makes decisions aligned with his true values, not with manufactured needs. He asks, do I want this because I truly desire it, or because I think it will impress someone else? This kind of man might live in a smaller home, but one that reflects his authentic lifestyle. He might drive a simpler car, but invest deeply in experiences or learning that actually matter to him. He might avoid debt traps entirely, because he doesn't need to perform wealth for validation. From the outside, this looks threatening. Why? Because if enough men stop consuming to prove themselves, entire industries must reorganize. They can no longer manipulate you with shame, status, or fear of incompleteness. Here's the brutal truth. Your insecurity is someone else's profit margin. Think of the slogans you've been fed. You're not complete without her. Real men provide. Happy wife, happy life. Each of these mantras keeps you tethered to external validation. Each one keeps you consuming, conforming, performing. But the man who doesn't need marriage flips the script. He doesn't reject love, but he no longer buys into the idea that his value depends on it. And once you stop believing you're broken, the spell is broken. Imagine what happens if men in large numbers adopt this mindset. Fewer men buy homes bigger than they need. Fewer men overwork just to provide. Fewer men spend money on appearances meant to impress potential partners. Fewer men allow themselves to be controlled by shame or fear of being alone. This doesn't just alter individual lives, it alters economies, industries, and social structures. That's why the man who doesn't need marriage is considered dangerous, not because he destroys relationships, but because he reveals that the pressure to marry is less about love and more about control. By now it should be clear why society is unsettled by the man who doesn't need marriage. He's financially independent, psychologically whole, and immune to many of the pressures that keep others in line. But there's another reason he's so threatening. His freedom makes him unpredictable. And unpredictability is the one thing a system built on order cannot tolerate. To understand this tension, we turn again to Nietzsche. He described two fundamental forces shaping human life, the Apollonian and the Dionysian. Runorti, the Apollonian represents order, logic, stability, structure, and predictability. Think of the family man with a mortgage, a 5-year plan, and a steady job. Runorti, the Dionysian represents chaos, creativity, passion, spontaneity, and freedom. Think of the artist who moves cities on a whim, the entrepreneur who risks everything on a new idea, the man who refuses to be bound. Society, of course, prefers the Apollonian. He's stable, easy to manage, and predictable. The Dionysian is dangerous, not because he's violent, but because he cannot be controlled. Marriage, in many ways, is designed to transform Dionysian energy into Apollonian order. The restless young man, filled with wild energy and creative chaos, is channeled into responsibilities, hondiamoke. His passion becomes providing. His risk-taking becomes calculated career moves. Hondiamokens' independence is redirected into family stability. In short, marriage takes the unpredictable force of Dionysian energy and funnels it into a socially acceptable role. This isn't necessarily bad. It keeps societies stable and economies growing, but it comes at a cost. The man loses access to parts of himself that once made him free. Now consider the man who refuses this transformation. He doesn't reject responsibility entirely, but he refuses to sacrifice his wildness in exchange for predictability. This man can switch cities without hesitation. He can quit a job that suffocates him. He can take creative risks without worrying about how they affect a spouse or children. He can embrace chaos when it fuels growth, and order when it serves his goals. This flexibility makes him far more dangerous than the predictable married man. Why? Because he can't be easily managed. He can't be guilted into staying at a job, shamed into buying more than he needs, or pressured into following the script. Here's the fascinating part. The unmarried man who doesn't need marriage isn't purely Dionysian. He hasn't surrendered to chaos entirely. Through Jung's process of individuation, he's integrated both sides of himself. He can be structured when necessary, disciplined, hardworking, reliable, but he can also be wild, creative, spontaneous, risk-taking when it benefits him. At dinner, he can be a gentleman. In business, he can be a warrior. With friends, he can be nurturing. With competitors, he can be ruthless. He's not trapped in either extreme. He's whole, and this wholeness makes him powerful in a way that society cannot predict or control. Most men, once married, lean so heavily into the Apollonian that they lose touch with their Dionysian nature. They become safe, predictable, controlled. Society applauds them for this. He's a good man, people say. He sacrificed his freedom for responsibility, but deep down, something is lost. The fire that once drove him to take risks, to pursue dreams, to live boldly, that fire is dimmed. The unmarried man, who doesn't need marriage, retains his fire. He hasn't traded it for predictability, and that fire is magnetic. It inspires others, not through words, but through presence. It whispers to other men, you could be free too. When men witness someone living authentically, balanced between order and chaos, responsible yet free, they begin to wonder if they too could reclaim their wildness. And if enough men embrace this balance, the entire system built on predictability begins to shake. Industries that rely on overworked providers, governments that rely on compliant citizens, traditions that rely on blind obedience, all of them are threatened by men who can't be tamed. So the real question becomes, can you quit your job tomorrow and travel the world? Can you pivot your life in an instant? Can you embrace creative chaos without asking anyone's permission? If you're married, probably not. And that's exactly the point. The man who doesn't need marriage lives with this power every day, not because he hates stability, but because he refuses to let stability suffocate his freedom. He is, in Nietzsche's terms, an overman. In Jung's terms, an individuated man. In society's terms, a dangerous man. So far, we've explored how society pressures men into marriage, how that pressure serves as social control, and how Nietzsche and Jung explain the deeper philosophical and psychological stakes. Now let's take it one step further. If the unmarried man who doesn't need marriage isn't broken, immature or selfish, then what is he? He is the model for a new kind of masculinity. A masculinity not defined by external roles, but by inner mastery. For centuries, masculinity was defined by clear external markers. Now like private, the protector, the husband, now like private. These roles served a purpose in traditional societies. They anchored men's identity within family and community structures. But today, those structures are shifting. Men no longer need to be providers in the old sense. Women earn their own incomes. Protection is no longer physical, but often institutional, provided by governments, laws, and technology. Marriage is no longer an economic necessity, and fatherhood is no longer an inevitable stage of life. The old script has collapsed, and with it, many men face an identity crisis. If I'm not a husband, father, or provider, what am I? Here's the revolutionary answer. You are not defined by your external roles. You are defined by your relationship to yourself. The new masculinity isn't about fulfilling a checklist of duties. It's about cultivating internal qualities that no one can take away. Bondrongs, strength of character, the ability to endure hardship without collapsing, creative expression, the courage to bring your unique vision into the world, consciousness, the awareness to distinguish between your true desires and society's programming, authenticity, the willingness to live as you are, not as others demand you be, self-mastery, the discipline to rule yourself, rather than seeking to rule others. These qualities don't vanish if you're single. They don't disappear without a wife. In fact, they flourish most strongly in men who are no longer chasing external validation. Think about how most men are taught to pursue power, get the better job, earn the bigger salary, drive the nicer car, win the more attractive partner. But this is borrowed power. It's fragile, because it depends on things outside your control. Lose the job, and your identity shakes. Lose the partner, and your worth feels diminished. The new masculinity redefines power as self-mastery. True power is not needing someone else to complete you. True power is not measuring yourself against society's checklist. True power is being able to walk away from anything that compromises your authenticity. This doesn't mean rejecting relationships. It means entering them from abundance, not scarcity, from wholeness, not neediness, from strength, not insecurity. Carl Jung described individuation as a journey that often requires passing through the dark night of the soul, a period of solitude, doubt, and inner confrontation. Most men avoid this. They fill the silence with constant activity, endless relationships, distractions, and obligations. They never sit with themselves long enough to ask, who am I without all this? But the man who doesn't need marriage has walked through that darkness. He's faced his shadow, the selfishness, the independence, the refusal to conform, and instead of hiding from it, he's integrated it. This integration creates a quiet, unshakable confidence, the kind that doesn't need to boast or perform, the kind that doesn't crumble when challenged, the kind that radiates authenticity without a word. Why does society find this threatening? Because authenticity is immune to manipulation. You can't guilt an authentic man into buying what he doesn't need. You can't shame him into marrying to prove his worth. You can't dangle status or approval in front of him as bait. He is free in the truest sense. And freedom, once again, is contagious. Other men see him and begin to question their own lives. They ask whether their choices were genuine or just scripted. They wonder what would happen if they lived from their authentic selves instead of their personas. And when enough men ask these questions, society must change. Here's the irony. The man who doesn't need marriage often creates stronger, healthier relationships than the man who blindly follows the script. Why? Because he doesn't enter them from insecurity. He doesn't need someone to validate him. He doesn't need to perform goodness or sacrifice just to prove he's worthy of love. Instead, he offers wholeness. He offers authenticity. He offers strength that doesn't collapse when tested. This kind of man doesn't reject relationships. He transforms them. He proves that partnership can be chosen from freedom rather than fear. The old masculinity said, prove yourself by providing for others. The new masculinity says, prove yourself by mastering yourself. The old masculinity said, your worth is measured by your family role. The new masculinity says, your worth is measured by your authenticity. The old masculinity said, sacrifice freedom for responsibility. The new masculinity says, integrate responsibility with freedom. And that's why the unmarried man who doesn't need marriage isn't a failure. He's a pioneer. He's showing the world what masculinity looks like when it's no longer defined by borrowed values. Up to this point, we've seen how the unmarried man unsettles society because he is free, whole, and authentic. But freedom is not just about rejecting what doesn't serve you, it's about consciously choosing what does. And this is where the real revolution begins, moving beyond marriage as a mandate, and seeing it instead as a choice. For most of human history, marriage wasn't optional. Your grandfather probably married not out of deep reflection but because he had to. Social pressure demanded it. Religion required it. Economics reinforced it. Marriage wasn't a decision, it was a default. You married because the alternative, remaining single, was unthinkable, even shameful. But today, for the first time, that obligation is crumbling. Men can survive without a wife. They can thrive financially, socially, and personally without being married. And when marriage becomes optional instead of mandatory, everything changes. Nietzsche posed a test for authentic living. He called the eternal recurrence. He asked, if you had to live this life over and over again for eternity, would you choose it? Apply this to marriage. Would you choose your relationship if you had to live it forever, on repeat? Many marriages would collapse under this question, because for many, marriage was not chosen, it was assumed, it was inherited from tradition, taken for granted, accepted without deep reflection. But the man who doesn't need marriage has already passed this test. He would rather remain alone than settle for a connection that isn't genuine. He refuses to sacrifice authenticity for approval. Carl Jung's idea of individuation provides the psychological key here. Once a man integrates his shadow and inner feminine, he becomes whole. He no longer projects his incompleteness onto women, expecting them to complete him. Instead, he meets others as a whole individual. This creates a radical new possibility, relationships based on mutual growth instead of mutual dependency. He doesn't need a woman to access his emotional depth, he already has it. He doesn't need her to nurture him, he has nurtured himself. Hontriaya. He doesn't need her to balance him, he has balanced himself. When two whole individuals come together, the relationship is not about filling gaps, it's about enhancing one another's lives. That's love by choice, not by compulsion. Think of the difference this way. Ronzathe, the scripted man, says, I should get married because that's what men do. Ronzathe, the conscious man, says, do I genuinely want this marriage? Does it align with my deepest values? Same action, different foundation. One comes from fear of incompleteness, the other comes from freedom. This is why the unmarried man terrifies society. He proves that marriage can be a choice, and once you see that, you can't unsee it. If marriage can be chosen freely, then so can everything else. Career, religion, lifestyle. The moment one social rule is revealed as optional, every rule comes under question. Jung spoke of the collective unconscious, the deep archetypal patterns that shape human behavior. For generations, marriage was one of those archetypes. It felt inevitable, like destiny, but today that archetype is dissolving. The man who doesn't need marriage pioneers a new pattern, showing that life can be meaningful without traditional validation. This isn't the death of love, it's the birth of conscious love. Relationships no longer need to be chains of obligation. They can be chosen freely, based on alignment, growth and authenticity. Nibelfel pagaman sa treat you kind for kaudizo, undas of spowik don't leave pogoanal town. It's now the gin of toe doming to of. These the most of broth and pulgal. It's the cliche be open. He refuses the false binary of marry or be a failure. Instead, he shows that you can thrive single, or you can marry from strength. And this vision is so attractive, so liberating, that it unsettles those still trapped in obligation. Because if freedom is possible for him, maybe it's possible for everyone. At the end of the day, it's not about whether you marry or not. It's about why you marry, or why you don't. Should you choose from fear, or from love? From insecurity, or from wholeness? From obligation, or from authenticity? The unmarried man has already answered this. He knows he is whole with or without marriage. Which means if he marries, it will never be to fill a void. It will be because the choice enhances his already complete life. That is true freedom. That is conscious choice. We've traveled a long road. We began with a simple scenario, a man at a family gathering who calmly says, I don't need to get married. That single sentence sends shockwaves of discomfort through the room. Why? Because it threatens one of society's oldest and deepest assumptions, that a man is incomplete until he marries. We've uncovered how that assumption isn't just cultural, it's psychological, economic, and even philosophical. It's been baked into tradition, reinforced by family, and exploited by billion-dollar industries. And yet we've also seen how the man who doesn't need marriage dismantles that illusion simply by living differently. The living question. Here's the truth. The unmarried man who thrives without marriage isn't dangerous because he destroys society. He's dangerous because he forces everyone around him to ask uncomfortable questions. Am I married because I truly wanted to be, or because I was told I should be? Ronrat, did I choose freely, or did I inherit a script? Have I built my life on authentic values, or on borrowed ones? These aren't easy questions. They cut deep. They challenge decades of assumptions, sacrifices, and compromises, and that's exactly why most people avoid them. But the unmarried man doesn't avoid them. He has already faced them. He has passed through Jung's dark night of the soul, integrated his shadow, embraced his independence, and found wholeness within himself. He has embodied Nietzsche's overman, not in some mythical sense, but in the very real act of creating his own values instead of inheriting them. He is living proof that you can be complete without following the script. And that's what makes him terrifying. Let's make something clear. This isn't about rejecting marriage. It's about rejecting compulsion. The man who doesn't need marriage may very well marry, but if he does, it will be from a place of wholeness, not lack, from strength, not weakness, from freedom, not obligation. And if he doesn't marry, he remains whole, authentic, and fulfilled. Either way, he wins, because he has claimed the right to choose. This is the essence of freedom, to live by your own values, not by the values imposed upon you. Now ask yourself, why would this freedom terrify society so much? Because a man who doesn't need marriage is hard to control. He can resist industries built on insecurity. He can live simply, consume less, and focus more on growth than appearances. Heart. He can form relationships based on authenticity rather than obligation. Such a man doesn't prop up the system in the same predictable ways. He doesn't buy just to impress. He doesn't stay quiet just to conform. He doesn't live just to perform. And if enough men live this way, the system itself begins to change. Economies built on neediness collapse. Social norms built on obedience dissolve. A new kind of freedom emerges. That's the real danger and the real promise of the man who doesn't need marriage. So what does it mean to be a man in this new paradigm? Not a provider by obligation, not a protector by default, not a husband by compulsion. It means becoming who you truly are. It means cultivating strength, authenticity, creativity, and self-mastery. It means defining yourself by your inner qualities, not your external roles. This is the new masculinity, not performance, but authenticity, not borrowed power, but self-mastery, not conformity, but choice. And here's the beauty of it. This masculinity doesn't reject relationships. It elevates them, because when two whole people come together, they don't complete one another. They expand one another. That is the future of love, the call to action. Now the question turns to you. Are you living your life or society's script? Are your choices authentic or inherited? Are you seeking validation or living from wholeness? These are not easy questions. They may unsettle you, even anger you, but they are necessary if you want to live authentically. The man who doesn't need marriage has already answered them. He has discovered that real freedom is not about controlling others, but about mastering yourself. He has shown that completeness is not found in someone else, it's found within. And now the choice is yours. Will you continue following the script, waiting for validation, living by obligations that may not even be yours? Or will you take the harder path, the path of questioning, of individuation, of self-mastery? Remember, the point is not whether you marry or not. The point is whether you choose freely, from authenticity, rather than blindly, from programming. The unmarried man has made his choice. He is whole, free, and complete. He is dangerous, not because he undermines society, but because he shows society that alternatives exist. So now I ask you, what's your choice? Your time is limited. Your life is yours. The question isn't whether you should marry or shouldn't. The question is whether you are choosing from your authentic self, or from a script you never wrote. The man who doesn't need marriage terrifies society for one reason. He reveals that you too can be free.